Hopefully this mic is working. I don't even know. Oh man. I'm better off not knowing. Uh-oh.
So to reach my wisdom teeth with that, using a bowl toothbrush and a bowl
And my mic.
Go field earbuds. Tried and true, reliable.
This thing, you follow your teeth, and you feel like, yes, I've done a thorough job. And that's
How y'all doing?
I wonder.
Building a homemade cannon.
Would I actually
Let's turn
would it seem any different? Would it be like, oh, now you're just using a machine. No, it turns out it's actually a very, very different experience. So, we're off on top right
I'm gonna watch a couple little little stories while we're here. A lot of people probably don't know about this stuff.
This is going to take a few minutes because it was a very large operation, but I want to start by
Get right to the meat of it here.
for a minute. With the coaches, with the teachers. She has a criminal history of meth arrest, and she provoked. All of them are in the country illegally. You hear what I said. The federal government will let you illegal immigrants. And DHS gave them a form.
Check this out.
DHS gave them a form, an ID, paperwork that allows them to fly for free. You know, Southwest will let your bags fly free. The federal government will let you illegal immigrants fly free. And they operate out of New York. And they were working up there, and the New York authorities said, if you don't have identification, you can't work in our sex trade up here. You know, we don't allow sex trade here at all, but New York will allow you to do some stuff if you've got the proper authority. So they say they make a lot of money. You're addicted to it. These ladies are going to give you more details. They tell us that they fly the major metro centers for free on the federal government, where they set up their appointments for sex all around the country. Did you hear what it said? Listen, folks, if they don't pay $3,000 a piece on Friday, they're in trouble. The human trafficker sets up the deal. Hey, this deal is just outside of Tampa. They say they show this ID, this card, this paper, and they fly for free down here. Then they fly back. But we heard a similar theme from all 21 of these folks. We can't work legally. We're addicted to this cash. It's a lot of cash and it's quick, so we have to give $3,000 a week. We get to keep everything above that. We have a crisis at the border. And because of the crisis at the border, we have people that are victimizing illegal folks, forcing them into the sex trade. Because we allow these criminals in the country illegally. We all rail about this and nobody pays any attention. And then we want to politic everything. Oh, we've had a good piece of legislation that limited the average to only 5,000 illegals a day in the country, and then we can shut it off. But if you can shut it off at 5,000 people illegally coming in this country a day, you can shut it off at no people illegally coming in this country a day. But the politicians are politicking while the victims are being victimized. I read an article this week that says, well, the illegals coming here aren't committing crime at any greater percentage than the people who are here illegally. What they didn't tell you is if they weren't here illegally at all, the crime they would commit here would be zero. So we're being victimized. But that doesn't make any difference on the national level. You see, because they sit up there behind their gated communities and in Congress, they play politics back and forth between the two parties. Wow. Illegals are victimized. Citizens are victimized. Children are victimized. You got this goofy looking kid here who's making sure that they come up with $3,000 a week apiece, and he's here illegally.
Anyone with $10,000 or more in credit card debt or personal loans may qualify for help from National Debt Relief. Minimum payments could literally keep you in debt for decades. $10,000 in debt can take anywhere from 14 to 26 years to pay off if you're only paying the minimums. And that's just $10,000.
It's a mess, and it doesn't have to be. If we can deal with it and catch it on the local level, they can stop it on the federal level. Shame on all. Every one of them. For not getting together and saying, you know, there are things bigger in this country than my individual politics. So now, we'll start with Jody. Jody, come on.
Good morning. My name is Jody Domingue, and I'm the Executive Director of Anti-Trafficking at One More Child. We would like to thank Sheriff Judd, the Polk County Sheriff's Detectives, and the various agencies that are represented here today for their continued partnership and for the ability to...
This was a struggle of Cuban patriots against a Cuban dictator.
On March 13, 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff put this document in front of the Secretary of Defense for approval from the President. This is a memo prepared by the most senior leaders in the U.S. military, some of the most powerful men in the country. And they're asking for permission to execute a plan to lob mortar shells into their own military bases with some damaged installations, and then to make hijacking attempts against civilian air and surface craft. They're proposing to blow up a U.S. ship in the U.S. naval base Guantanamo Bay, and even to conduct a terror campaign on American soil, exploding a few plastic explosives in carefully chosen spots. We're looking at a plan to blow things up on American soil and then to blame it all on Cuba.
Cuban people have not yet spoken their final piece.
This operation never happened, but it almost did, and that gets to a big question. Why would some of America's most powerful leaders charged with safeguarding our nation think that their duty would require them to lie to and terrorize the American people? In other words, why were they planning Operation Northwoods?
It is not the first time communist tanks have rolled over gallant men and women. Let the record show that our restraint is not inexhaustible.
Before we dive into today's kind of insane video, I need to thank the sponsor, who I'm very grateful for. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring today's video. For 3 years, maybe, I've been in therapy, and the behavioral area makes change in today's. They called it the Cuba problem. Cuba became a problem for the CIA when they watched this young activist with an affinity for cigars lead a communist revolution on the island, throwing out the American-friendly dictator and nationalizing all the valuable land and industries that American businesses had been getting rich off for decades. This was the Cold War, and communism was now 90 miles away, threatening to spread to other countries in Latin America, countries that American businesses also wanted to continue controlling and exploiting. And any day, this new leader could align with the Soviet Union, giving the U.S.'s biggest geopolitical rival a military base within breathing distance of Florida. So this was what the Joint Chiefs called their Cuba problem. The U.S. had a few solutions to their problem. First, they put an embargo on Cuba, blocking all U.S. exports to the country, except for food and medicine. Second, they stopped buying Cuba's largest export, sugar. This actually ended up backfiring when the Soviet Union stepped in to buy Cuban sugar, kicking off an economic alliance between these two communist countries, exactly what the U.S. didn't want. And third, the U.S. started making plans.
Amazing. Got Gabriella to the school dance. Amazing starts at CSL Plasma. Donate plasma today and receive up to $700 your first month. You can help create medicines that save lives while making a difference in your own. CSL Plasma. Do the amazing.
I need Master Chief.
Lots of plans. Plans to somehow get rid of Castro, to turn Cuba back into the American business-friendly client state, through whatever means necessary. In one of these secret plans, called Operation Zapata, the CIA recruited 1,500 Cuban exiles who fled to Miami during the Cuban Revolution. It was this little CIA-funded army called Brigade 2506, and the goal was to have them invade Cuba and remove Castro from power. So the CIA trained them at this camp in the mountains of Guatemala, where they had just recently executed a coup and installed a U.S.-friendly dictator. And right in the middle of the planning stages of this operation, JFK wins the presidency.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And he inherits this scheme to invade Cuba using exiled Cubans. The CIA briefs him on it, this plan to fix the Cuba problem by forcibly unseating Castro using Cuban exiles. And after some debate, JFK approves the plan. So on the 17th of April, 1961, they launched their invasion. Brigade 2506 landed on Playa Girón with the plan to invade the island and spark a popular revolution against Castro.
The assault has begun on the dictatorship of Fidel Castro. Landing were affected by rebels at several...
But it was a complete failure. Castro had found out about the invasion ahead of time. A radio station on the beach had spotted the invading ships arriving and called for help. Several of the invading ships sank on the coral reef, and the invading forces were met with immediate resistance from Cuban armed forces, who defeated them within 3 days. Most of them were captured. 9 U.S. servicemen actually flew combat missions in support of this invasion, 4 of which were shot down and killed in the process, something the U.S. government and the CIA would go on to deny for almost 30 years. But the point is that this invasion failed miserably, and JFK and his administration were to blame.
Too long we have fixed our eyes on traditional military needs, on armies prepared to cross borders, on missiles poised for flight. Now it should be clear that this is no longer enough.
JFK would later fire the CIA director, holding him responsible for the disastrous invasion plan that we know as the Bay of Pigs. But this didn't change anything. The US government was still obsessed with removing Castro from power. They just needed a new plan. So JFK initiates his own plan, called the Cuba Project, aka Operation Mongoose. Over the next year, the CIA employs hundreds of spies to collect intelligence on Cuba. They send submarines on recon missions to Cuban waters. They fund anti-Castro protest movements, spreading propaganda throughout the country. They sabotage Cuban infrastructure to create chaos, and they make dozens more plans to assassinate Castro directly, including preparing poisonous pills to be planted in a beverage to be drunk by Castro. They even hired the American mafia to deliver the pills, knowing that the mafia had their casinos kicked out of Havana during the revolution and would want revenge. But none of this worked. The assassination attempts all fell apart. Fidel Castro still remained in power, and his support wasn't wavering. And the US military was getting desperate. They needed to solve the Cuba problem before the Soviets could get more involved on the island. So after all these botched assassination attempts and failed invasions, the Joint Chiefs of Staff concluded that the only way to get rid of Castro was for the US military itself to invade Cuba and take him out. But they knew that the US public would not support an outright invasion. They needed to create a reason, a justification. And this gets us back to our document. The one that went to the Secretary of Defense for the President's approval. This cover and deception plan to make attacks on American targets, fake attacks that will be blamed on Cuba to raise tensions between the US and Cuba to justify an invasion, a legitimate provocation as the basis for a US military intervention in Cuba. In other words, a lie to the American public and the international community, a series of false flags to get what they wanted, and all detailed in this classified document that was only meant for a few people, with hopes that the president would approve in the spring of 1962.
If the nations of this hemisphere should fail to meet their commitments against outside communist penetration, then I want it clearly understood
Surprised it got out.
that this
Surprised they
government
let
will
that
not
out.
hesitate in meeting its primary obligation to charge the security of our nation.
So let's see what this plan actually says. It starts with the US military base at Guantanamo Bay, where they would start rumors using fake radio stations to get American-friendly locals to stage fake attacks on the base, starting riots in the surrounding area. Another proposed part of the plan was to blow up a US ship and blame it on Cuba. This was specifically called out as a, quote, remember the Maine incident, referencing the sinking of an American warship in Cuba in the late 1800s that the US used to justify intervening in Cuba back then to fight the Spanish. This is often thought of as a planned sabotage to justify the intervention. And here was the US military in the 60s at it again. The document predicts that the newspapers would start reporting on the casualties, causing a helpful wave of national indignation. They also wanted to create a fake terrorist campaign on American soil in Miami or Washington. They wanted to sink boats of Cuban refugees and stage the shooting of refugee targets, and even suggested exploding a few plastic bombs in American cities. These weren't all going to be pretend. They even say in the document that they would go to the extent of wounding people and then making fake arrests with prepared documents so it could all be widely publicized, making Cuba look like an irresponsible government worthy of American intervention. They thought through having American Air Force pilots fly over places like Nicaragua and drop bombs on cane fields to burn them down using weapons from the Soviet Union. But for this to work, they would have to be flying Cuban military-style aircraft. They would need to ensure that their planes were properly painted. They would also use these planes to harass American civilian aircraft, making it look like it was the Cubans doing this. They planned a fake hijacking of commercial planes to blame the Cuban government or to fake shooting down a civilian airline. And if that wasn't enough, the Joint Chiefs planned to create an incident which will make it appear that communist Cuban jets have destroyed a U.S. Air Force aircraft while it was flying over international waters in an unprovoked attack. Operation Northwoods was a reckless plan to lie and hurt people, proposed by top government leaders who were more and more desperate to invade Cuba. And they wanted to move fast, they say in just a few months. They needed to do this so that this attack wouldn't involve the Soviet Union, who still hadn't established any defense pact or military bases in Cuba. So what we're looking at here is the increasing desperation of the US military to achieve its goal. to solve the Cuba problem. If JFK would just approve this plan, then the military would get to work blowing things up, attacking their bases, and terrorizing the American people. But he rejected it. Operation Northwoods never happened.
Everyone deserves a healthcare partner who's there for what matters.
Let me guess. You got one of these ads for the bearskin hoodie that's like, this is the last hoodie you're ever going to need to buy. I got a bearskin. Let's take a look at the hoodie behind the ads. And there she is. A real bearskin in the flesh. Surprisingly heavier than I thought it would be. Okay. Ooh, no. That's made from fleece, and there's a lot of it. It's made from 330-gram bearskin fleece, and boy, is this thing warm. So besides just being a hoodie, this thing has a lot more features than your standard hoodie out there. I guess that's why Bearskin are calling it the ultimate outdoor hoodie. Now let's take a look at why. The main thing I wanted to show you guys was this winsulation design that they keep going on about, which basically refers to these rubber adjustable cuffs and the elastic waistband right here and the adjustable hood and this thick piece of material right here behind the zip that they call a storm flap. Okay, am I winsulated yet? You can seriously feel how this thing blocks the wind and cold and keeps the heat tucked inside your body. And of course, if you have any Velcro patches you want to wear, you can stick them on either side of the sleeves, on these morale patch areas. There's an insane amount of pockets. On the outside here, we have these two waist pockets, nice and solid, these two arm pockets, and this... Sorry?
JFK's rejection of this plan is one reason that there was a rift between him and the military, with the military wanting to take a hard line on Cuba, and JFK feeling the sting of the Bay of Pigs invasion, thinking that something like this was too much of a risk. A month later, another document came to him, the Joint Chiefs following up with another memo saying that the only way to remove the communist regime was military intervention by the United States, and that Cuba was a vital base of operations for espionage, sabotage, and subversion.
Do you think John Kennedy rejected that out of concern for harming us? I can show you exactly why he rejected it. Without even saying really a word. Well, unless you don't know who it was. Wait, where is it here?
That the mafia had their casino wasn't wavering, and the U.S. military was getting desperate. They needed that the only way they needed to go this nation of lit flags to get what they wanted, and all detailed in this classified.
Do not hesitate.
Where they would start rumors, blow up a nation, and here was in the spring, a series of false, a legitimate plan, and this gets all support wasn't wavering. And would want revenge. Leverage to be, they stabbed hundreds of support, holding him responsible. Court in his administration process treated them within their right.
Bear with me.
Can't do it.
Executed 5 of this was stuck though. If you or somebody and 1,500 into the American started making the so Cuba block stepped in to buy through whatever this little CIA funded club where they had
Can't do it for you. Yeah.
Cuba problem by. So on the 17th of April, 1960 styles, and after some debate, JFK at 5:06
Landing where
help several of the invading China U.S. year
for this or another.
obsessed with removing Bay employees, sabotage Cuban. They even hired the American fell apart. The Soviets could get more involved on the island. So after all these botched assassination attempts and failed invasion, U.S. military was getting desperate. They needed to solve the Cuba.
That's why right there. Look at that. That picture should say it all. That's why Kennedy did not want to go through with that. Because Castro and Khrushchev were so fucking tight up each other's ass. He was afraid Russia would immediately put their foot up our ass.
Problem before the Soviets could get more involved on the island. So after all these botched
That's the only
assassination
reason
attempts and failed
Kennedy didn't want to do it.
for meeting its prosecuting goat Cuban jets have destroyed a U.S. Air Force aircraft while it was flying over international waters in an unprovoked attack. Operation Debris wanting to him, the Joint Chiefs following up with another memo saying that the only way to remove the communist Cuban episode in American stopped them under their control again. Their disagreement was one of just a few degrees, the means, not the end. The reality is that the U.S. was one man, just one person, away from this operation happening.
What's the name of that ass?
From a full-scale invasion. If JFK had lost the presidency to Nixon,
what the hell
would
is that
Operation
called?
Northwoods have
MK
We
Ultra.
can't say conclusively, but it certainly raises the probability. But what's more startling is that outside of a few norms and some ideas about government, nothing fundamental.
Tortured by the CIA? Human experiments, torture, what?
Everyone needs to have this phone holder in their car to prevent accidents, revolutionizing the way we handle.
Throughout the 1950s, innocent people were being subjected to unethical and even painful human experiments. They'd be drugged, put into comas, electrocuted, stalked, all in the name of science. And some victims even lost their lives.
They gave a whole fucking town's worth of black guys syphilis without consent. They dosed people on super strong LSD daily for like a year straight every frigging day. They did a lot of really bad shit.
As a result. And the mastermind behind all of this, the CIA, a unit that we're supposed to trust, was using regular people as their test subjects without their knowledge or consent. They were looking to master and mind control drugs. They would be the first people in the world with this technology, but they needed real human beings to be able to test on, and for that, they turned to the unsuspecting general public, regular people like you and me. Thank God it was all exposed in the end, and thank God it's Freaky Friday. Let's talk about the reality of the MK Ultra project. Before we get into the video, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, Opera. Opera is an online browser that has completely changed my life in the past few months. It's so much faster and more secure than standard browsers, but I'd be lying if I didn't say my absolute favorite thing about Opera is their amazing tool called Aria, which is basically its own AI. Aria gives you instant answers about anything and everything you might need. I use it so much when I'm researching, especially researching this case, because there were a lot of sciencey terms that I had never heard. It has something called grouped personals that you could big messaging apps in there, but this video is going to cover something incorrect. No action should be taken in reliance upon the information in this video. All opinions that are about to be stated in this video are mine and mine alone. And with all that being said, let's get into the CIA's secret human experiment. It all began along with the Cold War in 1947. America was at war with the Soviet Union, and for the first time ever, nuclear war was on the cards. So everyone was terrified. And America was desperately trying to find a way to one-up the Soviet Union, to be one step ahead of them, to have a more powerful weapon than they had. They had to come up with something big, something bigger than a nuclear weapon, which is almost impossible. And that was when they settled on mind control. If they could control people's minds, then that could be the most powerful weapon on Earth. If they could control their enemy's minds, their thoughts, even their actions, then they could defeat them easily. But even more than that, even beyond this war that they were fighting, they could have world domination. If they were able to properly develop mind control, then holy shit, good luck everyone. Good luck to the whole entire world. But how on earth do you go about trying to control another person's mind? Well, that's exactly what Project MK Ultra was for. They were willing to try every method under the sun to find something that worked. And this included all the heinous things that I mentioned right in the beginning of the video. Luring people in off the streets, drugging them, electrocuting them, subjecting them to unconventional mental torture methods.
One thing that I didn't know before I started looking into this video is that MK Ultra is actually an umbrella term for a bunch of different experiments and operations that were going on. There was no like one big MK Ultra. MK Ultra is just the code name that was given to these series of experiments. It means mind control ultra. But yeah, there were so many different scientists working under MK Ultra. There were so many different experiments going on all over the world as well. It wasn't even just in America. It was so much bigger than I ever even imagined before I properly started digging into this. MK Ultra is one of those things that I've always thought that I knew everything. I always thought I knew what it was about. Absolutely not. Not until I started looking into this video. So the project began in 1953 and it was all kept super top secret. I mean, of course, the things that they were planning on doing to human beings was unspeakable. It would cause outrage if the general public found out. So for the next 20 years, 2 whole decades, these barbaric practices were going on without the general public knowing. That was, unless they were unlucky enough to be a part of one of the experiments. When choosing their victims, their unwilling participants for these experiments, the CIA was targeting expendables, which is a term that I absolutely hate. It basically means people that probably wouldn't be missed if they went missing. They might even go unnoticed if they went missing. People that society at large generally neglects. And I just think the term expendable makes them sound disposable. It's awful. But for MK Ultra, they were mainly targeting people that society deems as untrustworthy. So criminals, prisoners, even mental patients in hospitals, literal patients that were going there for some sort of treatment, for some cure. They were being experimented on. It's disgusting. And there are actually some reports about them kidnapping enemy agents and doing the experiments on them. Each experiment that was done and each victim's experience of MK Ultra is very different to each other. So it's hard for me to sit here and say, like, this is what they were doing to people, this is what they were doing in those labs. First of all, because a lot of the documentation on MK Ultra has been destroyed. We will get to that. And also partly because each person that has come forward, each victim that has told their story, has such a different experience because they really were just doing whatever the fuck they wanted to these people. It's so sad, it's so scary that they were treating human beings as guinea pigs for experimental testing in whatever way they liked. Test subjects would be messed with in every way possible. Physically, mentally, they would be pushed to their limits, all while being bombarded with questions and being observed and being recorded, because these scientists wanted to know how the things that they were doing to these people were affecting their brains. Because all of these projects were designed for them to be able to understand the human mind better, and if they could understand it, then maybe they could figure out how to destroy it. The head of MK Ultra, the designated leader of this evil operation, was a research chemist named Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. He'd worked in government labs for about 10 years before he was appointed the head of MK Ultra, and he was over the moon when this happened. Because Gottlieb was incredibly patriotic. He was just desperate to serve his country in some way. He would have fought in World War II, and he did apply, but he was actually turned away because he had some sort of deformity in his feet that meant he couldn't fight. So for him, Project MK Ultra became some sort of warped way for him to be able to serve his country. He could discover them a mind control drug or a mind control method that could win them the war. One of the first things Gottlieb did when he started MK Ultra, something that he'd been wanting to do for years and years and years, was experimentation into the effects of LSD on the mind. LSD had only been discovered or created about 10 years prior to this, so it was super new and no one knew the full extent of this drug just yet. LSD is a man-made hallucinogenic drug that is ingested through the mouth, either through a tab or even through liquid that can be put into a drink or on food. And its effects on the user are relatively unpredictable as far as the user's individual experience goes. LSD trips almost always include some sort of hallucination, but
back, so I gotta go pour that stuff. Now, the hallucination's not really like a huge hallucination. It's more like when you see heat coming off a road and you see that wavy form. It's more of that type of hallucination, not like seeing elephants and people flying, crazy shit. It's more like waveform hallucinations, like water and stuff. But yeah, so the illegal immigrants have free airfare wherever they want. That's pretty interesting. Our government nearly declared war on its own citizens. CIA is crazy. But yeah, they dosed a bunch of people. Whitey Bulger, they say he was one of the people that they dosed with the super strong LSD for every day for over a year while he was locked up. It's nuts. Of course, it's going to have some effect on you. Big time. Big time. I don't know if they'll get into the syphilis one too. That was terrible. A lot of people don't talk about that one because it's so racist. Because it was all poor black folk, guys. Because our government's a trip. I've never been like a conspiracy theorist at all or anti-government. People would be like, oh, 9/11 was an inside job. You're like, dude, you're high. No, I'm like starting to see why people think that stuff. I'm just Mike. End up pulling the whole tripod over. Freaking measuring cups are wicked expensive, so try and wipe them out or reuse them at least 2 or 3 times. It's been working. Graduated. Yeah, probably pretty good size. Can't really do it in a small one. I'll try and get all the air bubbles out. There's a million of them. So try and build my own little vacuum chamber. I don't know if you'll be able to tell from the camera bubbles. The other day I had a rag that I didn't realize was full of sanding dust and it like spilled all over this. I can't even see the logos around. Make it better. back and forth to make sure it covers everything. It also helps the bubbles come up a little better. A lot of them claim they're bubble free. No, they're never bubble free. Some of them are way worse than others. This is actually the worst one I've ever had as far as bubbles. So many of them, and they're super stubborn. Of course, the way I mix it up is where a lot of the air bubbles come from, because I'm stirring it way too aggressively. they overheat it really easy too. A lot of people use a blowtorch. I can't imagine really doing it that way. You do it for a little bit too long, it just clumps up. Like instant, like clumpage. You gotta kind of be careful. There are more pockets of bubbles in here than any other project I've ever done. This is very bad with the bubbles.
51 minutes already. Good lord, that was so freaking fast. Every time I need something, it's always in the freaking bottom one. Stack them all off, put them back on. At least this way you can just remove it every week. Not just stack them top of each other. Some dimensions. It's like a Woohoo! I actually love this thing, but it's so freaking expensive. Friggin' dimensions. You can get through the Harbor Freight. Heat interest. A lot of things. Dimensions. Actually routed out all those strips. Each one of them's got like a routed cove. It's cool. You could just make it a square, I guess. It wouldn't be as pretty. Some square ones right here. For the bigger cases. Can't hardly notice the difference. This one is cooled down. This one is not. Do a lot of measuring. charge up and do that. Oh, I have viewers now. Oh, I don't believe it. I have viewers. Hello. They're long gone already, but if not, I hate a microphone. I guess I should use it now that people are actually here. Can you hear me? Project pads. Forgot about these. Sofa table, arts and crafts, desks, stupid little plans that I will write out. God, I drink too much coffee. I'm shaking like fucking crazy. I mean, it'd be 3 different sizes. There's like so few there compared to what we just seen on that. But I think I had way friggin' more than that. That's okay though. Actually, that'll be pretty tall as it is. How come I hear? Oh, fuck right hell. As always. Oh, hey, Rush. Television. Oh, you might go down. Some nitro steel 3-inch mags. Iron. Should check my cameras, but then I gotta stop streaming. It's all the same with 16. My big pieces are out in the garage. Need some 3/4-inch plywood sides and shit. Middle. You know what? I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll do a whole separate one. Sorry to bone you.